that in my earlier lecture I dwell upon how the nation state, they influence the global power and the policies of the other states. Say, for example, United States used to influence the decision making of several other nations, and then the shift took place from the unipolar to bipolar and then multipolar, like that. Today we will deal with the topic how the world is being regulated by different non-state sectors. We know that since after the Second World War, several institutions were created, and one of the major institutions was the United Nations. And along with the United Nations, there are other institutions which were created to regulate the finance and the trade. Those were World Bank, the IMF, and the International Trade Organizations, or the GATT. So therefore, today we will dwell with how the change has taken place in the global governance, both at the institutional level as well as at the conceptual level. Conceptual level, particularly when we are in the era of globalization, and with the changes in the technology and with the changes in the several other problems associated with the society or the political system or with the technology, so certain conceptual shift is also taking place in the whole governance system. So first I will start with the United Nations, how it started governing the world and how the shift is taking place, even in its own framework, as well as how there are other institutions which are becoming more influential than the United Nations. And we also see it as evidence that what we thought when the United Nations was formed, that after the two great World War I and World War II, it was thought that yes, the world will have a peaceful society, and whenever there is a intervention by one state on the freedom of the other state, United Nations will take a predominant role. But today we find that the war are still taking place, and we have seen it during the Gulf War. We have seen it in several other war in the Middle East, in Syria, Iraq, and so many other places where the United Nations have not been found to be so effective. Even today, when today being the 24th February, and we are celebrating, or we are seeing the first anniversary of the Russia-Ukraine war. It's not a celebration, it's a matter of great apathy and a great concern world over, that despite there being so many agencies to govern the global system, but the war is still continuing. So therefore, there is a need to understand how the shift is taking place in the global governance. When we look at the United Nations has the the highest decision-making body, the United Nations General Assembly, and today the United Nations is going for a vote whether how many countries are in favor of Ukraine and how many countries are in favor of Russia. So that voting will take place, but it will not have any kind of legal impact or any kind of compulsion on the either side for stopping the war. So that is about United Nations General Assembly. Then it has the Security Council, it has the UN Economic Social Council, it has the International Court of Justice, and several other organizations. But along with it, as I said, that apart from United Nations, there are other organizations like World Bank, IMF, WTO, BRICS, Quad, and there was G8, G7, then G8, and now G20. Now the role of each of the institutions is changing, partly because they are becoming ineffective or less effective, and partly because that the emergence of the new institution has become essential, as per the regional demand and as per the demand in the technology, and also because we are living now in a borderless world with the globalization. In the earlier era, the globalization was not so effective, and since 1990, we find that the globalization has become, more and more pervasive. And then there is a change in the, the world trade and the world investment. Earlier, the trade and investment was also limited, and now the trade and investments are also in a big volume because of the technological changes, because of the changes in the, the information technology, the communication technology. And after the formation of the WTO with effect from 1195, the earlier GATT, there is a shift from in the institutional framework from GATT to WTO. So the earlier GATT was confined conceptually only for the trade in goods, and the today's WTO is more comprehensive, not only limited to the goods, and that also the GATT was limited to only to the industrial goods, whereas the present WTO is dealing with both the industrial goods as well as the agricultural goods. And then apart from the trade in goods, it is dealing with trade in services through another agreement called General Agreement on Trade Related Services, and then also covering the technological aspect through the IPRs, that is trade related aspects of intellectual property right. So therefore, there is a change in the shift not only in the institutional framework but also in the conceptual framework. So this is what we have to look at in today's deliberation. So broadly, what I wanted to say that over the period, we find that new institutions have been created, and the area of the regulation, because at the local level, at the regional level, at the global level. So at the global level, we find lot of changes have taken place because of the environmental changes, because of the technological changes, and because of the changes in the framework for the the trade, goods, and the services, and particularly to regulate the trade, to regulate the services, to regulate the technological transfer. So basically, these global governance, as I said, through the non-state sector is taking place through several intergovernmental organizations as well as through several non-governmental organizations. So we have seen that it is the World Bank, it is the International Monetary Fund, and it is the WTO. Then we have seen that there are several regional and the international organizations like the European Union, the OPEC, the OECD, the ASEAN, the International Atomic Energy Agency, the SAARC, the South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation, the BIMSTEC Bay of Bengal Initiative for Multi-Sectoral Technical and Economic Cooperation, which was established in 1997. Then we have the African Union, then we have the Interpol, then we have the NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, then we have the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. Now, when I mean naming these organizations, let me also tell you that earlier the World Bank and the IMF was only, acting as the major institutional framework for the issues relating to the finance and the banking. But today, the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, which has been created in 2016, so in 1944, those institutions were created as IMF, World Bank, but today when we found that those organizations are not so effective, so therefore the need has been felt for regional level financing institutions. So today, this Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank is becoming more and more effective. Likewise, we have also seen that for several trade negotiations and for several political level negotiations, some regional associations, some regional treaties are being signed amongst the nation. So, as we have also seen that the world is broadly divided into the developed countries group and the developing countries group. So, for the developed countries, we find that there was OECD, Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. So, therefore, the developing countries, particularly Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, so they formed another group for the developing countries for the cooperation for the trade and other geopolitical issues. So that way we have also seen that recently another organization has come up, particularly after the breakup of the Soviet Russia. So several Central East European countries were created, and for the Asia, which is broadly Eurasia. So for Eurasia, now we have the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which consists of several countries which were earlier part of Kazakhstan, etc., which were part of Russia, Soviet Russia. So those countries, then Russia, China, India, Pakistan. So there is a SCO. Now we find that the G7 group, which earlier included Russia, but thereafter Russia has been ousted from there. Now again this consists of only 7 countries, which is Canada, US, UK, Germany, Italy, France, and Japan. But yes, in all the meetings for the G7 group, India and China are always invited. So what we find is that the organizations are also changing for the betterment and for better effective cooperation amongst them. So there are organizations like European Union, we still at a regional level for the European nations, and then there are organizations which are based in Asia for like ASEAN and for say now SCO and the BRICS. So then there was a discussion that instead of there being a separate group for the developed country and for the developing country, so a need was felt, particularly after the the economic crisis in United States, which led to the global crisis in 2008-9 with the banking crisis and several other problems in the global economic system. So to come over such big economic crisis, a need was felt that all the nations from the developed countries as well as from the developing countries to join hands. So the G20 has been formed since 2009. Today, India is leading the G20 group, and every year previously the Indonesian government was leading it, but today Prime Minister Modi is the chairman of the G20 group. So this is how changes have taken place at the institutional framework as well as at the conceptual framework. Now, at the United Nations level also, earlier the priority was more on the political discussions and political alliances. But today we find that at the United Nations level also, several other organizations have become more and more effective. Say, for example, on the issue of the environment. So, for the first summit, on the Earth Summit, the meeting took place at Stockholm in 1972. So environment became the major issue because of the spread of the greenhouse gases and the global warming. So the next conference took place on the environmental issues at Rio de Janeiro, then at Kyoto, and finally, the United Nations formed another organization called the United Nations Framework on Convention for Climate Change, so UNFCCC. So under the framework of the UNFCCC, all the member countries, they started meeting on the annual basis, which is known as the Conference of Parties. And the Conference of Party, in their 21st meeting in 2015, they signed an agreement called the Paris Agreement. And in the Paris Agreement, the resolution was that the Mother Earth must be saved. And today, you see, apart from the political and the economic issue, the environment issue has taken the major space. So this is how shift is taking place both at the institutional level as well as at the the conceptual level. So today at the conceptual level, the environment issue, the climate change issue has become the major issue. In the recently held COP27 in Egypt, the member nations, they have taken the resolve that yes, according to the report of IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on the Climate Change, and the resolve is that the temperature of the Earth must be maintained at 1.5 degrees Celsius above the pre-industrial temperature level of 1850. And for that, in the Paris Agreement, there are several aspects, and one aspect is that each country has to give a national determined commitment how they would restrict the emission of the CO2 and the methane gases. So for that, a carbon budget is prepared, and the process is for decarbonization and to achieve the goal of the net zero by 2050. Each country cannot, achieve the target by 2050, which is said to be too early because, reducing or stopping the uses of the fossil fuel is not so easy, because the major source of energy still remain the oil, gas, and the coal. So therefore, India has, committed for this net zero by 2070. China has also not agreed for 2050. They have said for 2060. So several countries have given their national determined commitment to achieve the target of, net zero. But there are NGOs which are saying that even net zero is not enough. You have to ultimately go for the real zero. So there also there are certain areas where the members are agreeing and disagreeing, because some countries say that no, China is emitting the highest amount of carbon, and somebody says the US and the developed countries, they have done the damage to the environment through their early industrialization. As far as India is concerned, the per capita emission of the carbon by India is lowest, that is only 1.74 ton of CO2 as against China 8.2 and US per capita 13.68 ton of CO2 every year. And in terms of percentage, China emits 32%, US 12.6%, and India only 6.5%. But then India has, already made a commitment, and by 2030, our Prime Minister has said that we will be, producing our electricity 50% through the non-fossil fuel. That is about 500 giga tons. So that is what India has committed for. So what I was trying to say, that yes, there has been changes in the institutions, So the role of United Nations to that extent is changing, though yes, political role is there, but at the same time the role for controlling the environmental problem is also increasing. So likewise, we also find that certain changes are taking place, as I said, in the WTO framework, in the United Nations framework, and also now because of the cyber security, because of the information technology. When we look at it in a summary form, we find broadly there is shift in 5 or 6 aspects. One, in the political outlook, from United Nations to several groups like BRICS, G8, the Quad, etc. And then we find the change in the trade issues from GATT to WTO, and the conceptual changes from the industrial goods to the services to the intellectual property rights and so on. And then on the climatic issues and the environmental issues, where we find that United Nations framework of Convention on Climate Change and IPCC report, and then the commitment for the net zero and the issues like that. And then we find there are changes in the conceptual framework for the health-related issues, particularly after the COVID and the corona, and the role of the WHO, World Health Organizations, and several other organizations. And similarly, we have also seen that because of the changes in the technology, the information technology, the cyber security, and because of the cross-border terrorism, so several other organizations to deal with the, like the Interpol and several other cooperation relating to stop and to control the terrorism, particularly after the 9/11. Now, if we think about India, India has been a very dynamic country. According to the change in the requirement, according to the geopolitical changes, according to the other issues, India has been providing leadership to the world. Even when the BRICS was formed, like Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South African issue, India took the lead, and instead of coming under the pressure of the developed world, or to provide a leadership, how there can be more and more cooperation among the developing countries. Earlier there was South-South cooperation, so this was, in one form that Brazil, Russia, India, China cooperation is happening, because these are few countries which represent the, around 50% of the global population. So there had been, inequality in the wealth and inequality in the share of the global GDP. So with the mutual cooperation through the BRICS, India has been trying to play a very dominant role. Likewise, for the geopolitical region, India also considered necessary to form another kind of alliance with the United States, Japan, Australia, and India. That is Quad, and that is basically to maintain peace in the Indian Ocean, and for a strategic region, this has been formed. Now, India is always taking a very neutral and a very important role, and it is not going for in any of the bloc. Like, say, some people say that with the Ukraine-Russia war, India is not. India, China, and South Africa, these are the 3 countries which have not voted on the either side. So they have maintained their neutrality, and therefore it is very important today, even being a leader in the G20 group, because when there was only G7 or G8, so India had been playing a very vital role, and India, China both together created a situation whereby the developed country had to agree, without taking India and China also in the decision making for process, world cannot grow together. So today India is providing leadership at G20, and the world is looking at India, the Prime Minister, for any kind of difficulty in the process of trade, investment, or any other geopolitical issue. Now, coming to the climate issue, Here also India has provided lead in creating a international solar alliance, and then also giving the concept of creating wealth out of the waste. Even in this budget, there has been several provisions for converting the waste into wealth through solid waste management and through developing several green technology. I had the occasion to visit one of such solid waste management plant in Goa recently, and what I found that 30 gram panchayat, their solid waste and the liquid waste that is being used for recycling and also for producing the biogas. With the only 30 gram panchayat waste has enabled that solid waste plant to produce 30 megawatt of the biogas. So this is how, if in all the big cities, if we go as per the priority given by our Prime Minister, for the solid waste management, so this green technology and renewable sources of energy from the solar, wind, and hydropower, and several other green hydrogen. So this will, create an example. And not only this, India also believe in the change in the lifestyle, and that also can become, according to our ethics, what we say that we should not, spend more on our consumption. There should be restrained consumption, as has been said in our Isha Upanishad, Vashya Upanishad also, that tena tyaktena bhunjita. So we follow the principle, not a Bhogvadi culture, but a Yogvadi culture. So we believe in yoga, we believe in tyag, the renunciation and the restrained way of life. So this is how Prime Minister has, spoken about our old tradition of the whole world is one family. So Vasudev Kutumbakam is our main motto. Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinam is our main motto. So this is how India, in all important issues for the global governance, India is, trying to create new culture.